Bonjour à tous. J'ai l'impression que le micro, il est ouvert. Bonjour à tous, merci de prendre place. Bienvenue pour cette...
So good afternoon to all of you. Take a seat. Working to live or living to work. I'm Olivier Auguste. I'm the deputy head of the Parisien. I will introduce the different people, so we are quite many. We'll be quite warm all together. Stéphane Dedeyan, CEO of CNP Insurance. So second position to the left, Sophie Boisson. You are the CEO of Clariane. This is the new name of your group, bringing together Clinicea Clinics, the petit-fils Clarisse Magnin. You are the managing partner in France for McKinsey Company. Laurent Hartmann, chief economist of the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, and Arnaud Souriceau, you are the founder of One Man Support. This is a platform bringing together 3,500 consultants and transition managers. And these are not your employees, but these are self-employed people. So we'll have a Q&A session, so don't hesitate to prepare your questions. So Pierre Doques, you are a member of the Cercle des Économies, a specialist in political history and the history of thoughts. You are the coordinator of this session, so it's up to you to introduce the topic. How do we relate to work, and what can you tell us about that? Thanks a lot. So I will introduce the topic. Allow me to flag up two questions in a very simple fashion. First of all, so there is no unified concept of work over the centuries. The collective representation of work has completely changed over time. Second question, labor crises. This is what we are going through, and we experienced them in the past already, so it means that we can nuance and qualify the issue. First question, labor representation over time. It's a very simple, over centuries. Labor work was synonymous with a curse, with unhappiness. Have in mind Adam and Eve being chased out of the earth paradise, and remember the tripalium. This was a wrong etymology. Wrong etymologies are as important as true etymologies. So why work was degraded, deteriorated? Because it was connected to work being based on slavery to a certain extent. At that time, it was not a matter of remunerating a job. Subordination was not rejected, but the slavery-based origin of work was fully deteriorated. So it didn't mean that people didn't do anything, but these people were asked to be idle, but in a studious way. This is what we call Oslum, and this trend lasted for millennials, and there has been a switch, a change, even though it was prepared 1 century before. But there was a sea change, the Industrial Revolution, or the French Revolution, or the American Revolution. So work was a curse, was degraded, and then it became the essential unique mediation between man and nature. And it was then applied to human sciences and social sciences, and allow me to refer to Michel Foucault, who played a key role. Work From these revolutions, these bourgeois revolutions, work made it possible to structure all social sciences, all human sciences around this concept. And there are lots of significant characters. David Ricardo with the value of work, Hegel, the philosopher of work, Marx. I don't need to tell what is done. So there has been a swing of the pendulum. What is degraded is the idle class. The idle class is deteriorated from the top and from the bottom. At the bottom, you have the poor people, those who don't work, the unemployed people, the jobless people who are suffering from this new conception of the world. And at the top, the idle classes. Veblen illustrated that, talking about the idle class. And in fact, it is not predatory, but it is sterile. And it was highlighted at that time. So this is a general idea of work and of revolutions. And work managed to raise its profile through bourgeois-based revolutions. Is it a paradox? I don't think so, because the revolutionaries who embarked upon the French Revolution or American Revolution, they considered themselves as producers. So you just need to refer to Saint-Simon. So much for the first idea. Second idea that I would like to summarize very quickly is that there were many other labor crises and work crises since those revolutions. The main labor revolution, it was an amazing, outstanding revolution. The transition from the poking out system to the factory system. In other words, the transition from a system characterized with artisans, craftsmen, working for merchants, for manufacturers, and they are semi-independent, they are semi-autonomous, and this transition was extremely violent, conducing to a crisis with lots of revolts. And of course, you had the Luddites. They didn't break the machines, but they were against the factories. There were a series of lots of fights and battles on a daily basis. And I have in mind another point. Workers thought that they had a good mastery of time, and they were going to the mill, to the devilish mill, and they thought that they could be absent from work. And on Monday, they didn't want to work. And this autonomy was deprived of them, and they had to comply with new standards. Basically, people had to work for 12 hours for 6 days, and the labor curve is dependent on the level of revenues and income that they will get. So, in addition to that, at the end of the 19th century, there was some pressure on the organization of labor through the scientific organization of work, thanks to, or because of Taylor, thanks to Fordism. And these elements are pivotal. The labor organization was within the hands of the employee, of the worker, moved into the hands of experts, because it was the effort of Frederick Taylor so to remove the organization of work by workers, and it was then transferred to managers. So there were massive strikes, and Henry Ford invented, for this reason, the $5 wage a day. So it was a matter of combating the rate of turnover by increasing wages. And with the $5 a day, income increased by 1/3. Have another crisis in mind, the crisis in the 1970s, and productivity dwindled and productivity was blocked. Remember the crisis in the 1970s, it was characterized by a rise in absenteeism, and at last the current crisis that we are undergoing. And I will give the floor to the different people so that they can talk about the current crisis. Thanks a lot, Pierre Dockès, for setting the backdrop. We've talked about organization of work, work time, wages, hierarchy. We'll continue to talk about that. Stéphane de Deyon, Chief Executive Officer of CNP Assurance. So you have lots of people working from home. The working time, weekly working time is dwindling, but there were many demonstrators during the pension reform. And if we work until 64 years of age, it means that 2 years of our life will be robbed from us. So do you see this paradox at work? So good afternoon to all of you. Of course, if we talk about work and employment on this front, I think that we are going through a paradox. On the one hand, there's a positive revolution of work and labor, reindustrialization related issues, the advent of brutal inflation in our professional lives, the war of talent mean that today all questions having to do with income, generalized teleworking, and 4-day week have never been so much on the agenda. And you have great resignation, burnout, bore-out. So you talked about the pension reform. To work 2 more years means that 2 years of our life will be stolen, but 54% of French people consider that work is a constraint. So, of course, on the one hand, we have a positive revolution of work, and at the same time, there are some people who want to move out of work. Why is it paradoxical? Because there are other reasons, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm the CEO of a major insurance company, CNP Assurance. I would say that my company is a public company, a member of the La Poste Group, a subsidiary of La Banque Postale. Of course, we are in a business that is not much liked. So what is important is the mission, the assignments, the room for maneuver for people, French people. The young French people, they want to get a good balance between private life and professional life and good working conditions. But of course, they want to be useful. There's a quest for usefulness, for freedom, and for possibilities. So allow me to talk about usefulness. When we recruit people, and I think that many of you have recruited many people, the first young people that we meet, they will tell you what are the corporate commitments for the planet, for society as a whole. So, of course, we can talk about our cornerstones, our foundations, our sponsorship programs, but very often we hit a wall. But what is at stake is the core business. To what extent the core business has an impact? To what extent do we contribute to the social, ecological interest? How can we transform a society as a whole? And of course, you should then be attractive and enticing on the economic and financial front. It is much more than that. At CNP Assurance, we said that we gave up profitable investments because they are out of touch with the agreements of Paris, the Accords of Paris. So we decided to freeze the prices for if you want to borrow some money, and when we say that we don't want to increase the premium when there are some health risks, I can tell you that as a recruiter, as an employer, we are more attractive. And it's like a virtuous circle. If you consider the index of well-being at work, the lack of commitment of an employee is worth 15,000 euros a year. And in the banking and insurance sectors, like in other sectors, it's not easy to recruit people. So we need to be useful, but freedom is key. Freedom is the second pillar of our HR policy. And of course, you have freedom on the one hand, technocracy, bureaucracy, and terrorism on the other hand. So insurance is a very regulated business. Financial, statistical, legal expertise call the shots. Of course, the best experts, they are appointed, they are bosses, and they will validate everything at their own level. Then they will turn the employees into people who execute. And the work of these people should be terrorized in order to get productivity gains. We don't want that. And there's a risk that we take. And we give freedom to the people on the field with the support of managers. And of course, what is important is to think about the quality of work for more customer satisfaction. In order to control the operational risks, we will give 25% of our budget of IT change, 95 billion euros, so that they can implement their ideas with the support of their managers. But what have we noticed? We've noticed that autonomy will breed quality. Useless tasks are removed, and with freedom, there's more enjoyment at work. And since the implementation of this program called AtMove, people are increasingly committed.
To be short on this last point, the last point are the possibilities. That we live in a world where we can be the President of the Republic at 39 years of age. We can be the best football player at 22, or soccer player at the head of GAFAM, which changed the face of the world at 30 years old, and can be the Director General of Leroy Merlin at 28. And so there's an acceleration of time that's imposed on us. And if we propose to our collaborators, and notably the youngest, if we give them linear perspectives, well, linear is equal to endless. And so what we try to do is try to open the paths, and we place that at the heart of the culture of our corporate culture. First example, we experimented systems that we called Let's Talk About Ambitions, in which all collaborators can between themselves with the COMEX to discuss about the strategy of the enterprise, share their concerns, propose their ideas, create relationships, ties that go beyond hierarchies. And second example is we chose to promote young talents, and I'm very proud to have a COMEX in which we have women under 40 that did all their career in the company and that are accompanied in their evolution. For the third example, I strongly believe in the virtue of accessibility, exemplarity, proximity, a kind of modernity also that doesn't place barriers. So that's why nor myself or any members of the general management will oppose to that. So to conclude, I think I'm turning into a Marxist, in fact, and I would encourage all entrepreneurs in all countries to unite, free work, give back freedom, and do back to the future.
On aura appris qu'il y a de la bureaucratie.
So there's bureaucracy in enterprise, and Marxist corporate leaders. Well, it's big news. So work to live, live to work. Same question, differently maybe. At the head of Clarion, based on your experience, can you overcome these antagonisms? Can you reconcile all that? And how do you proceed? Well, first of all, hello everybody. I would like to go over all the topics that Stéphane just raised, but in a different universe, because we're talking about services to the people, health services, activities that involve contact, proximity, with qualification levels that are much lower. You know, the level of qualification is much lower. It's high school level. So it's medical activities, low qualified medical activities. So what characterizes this French paradox, when you ask French people, it's a study from the Montaigne Institute, 77% say that they're satisfied with their work. So that's the good side. And when I look, I think that corporate leaders, you know, all have this kind of score between 77, 75, 80% satisfaction rate. But when you look at the absenteeism, well, it increased by 3 points since the COVID. In France, in the person service activity, it raised by 10%. And it's much more than in other countries where we operate. And so we have leaves of absence that have increased a lot. So like Jérôme Firko said, working is something you do between vacations, enabling to finance your time off. So I think behind all this, there are three sources of discomfort, I would say. And we refer to what Philippe Diribarne says on the culture of honor and recognition, pride. I think there are three elements to overcome this paradox. First of all, in fact, the French in particular, they need that their autonomy and the collective usefulness of their activity be recognized, but also their expertise and competency. And the first concern we have is we want to be to work in an activity that makes sense and that either personally what we bring is recognized as such. Not only the intimacy of the management activity, but when I go home, when I get home, when I talk to my children and everything, what I say makes sense about my activity. It's the question of naming things, you know. I'll give you a simple example. When in some of my organizations recently, I was interviewing people, asking them, what do you do? Well, I would get answers. I'm a multi-activity agent. So I'm sorry, but that doesn't say what this person contributes with. You know, there's no pride in there with someone who's polyvalent, you know, so you're just someone who's a supplement, but we don't talk about the usefulness of this person and the utility of this person. So naming in dignity, recognizing the importance is something that's very important, especially in the French environment. Second thing is a very high, strong demand to have a capacity to decide, not only follow prescriptions, and Pierre de Castries reminded us of that. The capacity to decide is to give a chance for a social proximity dialogue, capacity to organize, because it's, when you serve the client, when you're close to the patient, you know, and you can make the micro adjustments to work better. So we believe in that. We've invested a lot. We have 70% of our collaborators who have a mandate, and so we have proximity representatives everywhere. We have corporate committees at the regional level, and we have a good dialogue, which is a very good. And the last dimension is the development perspectives. Not everybody is going to become a CEO, but again, it's honorum cursus, a cursus honorum. And if I should plead for something, I'm not going to say countries of all world unite or workers of all world unite. I think we have to really work at improving the qualifications. We created a corporate university in trades where we can, at any age, maybe get a new diploma, go from carer to nurse, eventually get management positions, have specialization diplomas. It's useful for the company. So that was Ford's approach through competencies and qualifications. That's useful for the worker, for the employee, because it's a diploma that has a symbolic but a merchant value. It's a sesame to be able to continue to develop oneself in a company or in a richer professional life. And I think these, if you fill this triptychal, that of recognition, better consideration for competencies, for one's competencies, the dialogue capacity, organizational capacity, and then the participation, involvement, and the development through diplomas, through training, through, and then I think we can overcome this apparent dilemma. Thank you, Sophie Boissard. Clarisse Magnan, McKinsey. We've already heard many things, many notions, many ideas on what's becoming our relationship to work, new relationship. Maybe we'll try to ask you to give us a few figures, a few ideas, a few examples. That's what consultants are good at. Okay, hello everybody. So on the 4 previous years, we carried out about 10 studies on the relationship to work and to the employee, and we noted that we're facing an absolute rupture of this relationship to work. And we could be led to thought that it changes according to the generation, it could by gender or by country, but in fact not. It doesn't. No. What comes out of these studies over the 4 last years, recent years, in 15 countries, so we did worked on European countries and the US, but the whole Western world, it's a bit different in emerging economies, but in the developed countries, people all say about the same, express the same. They all want to look outside their companies, their enterprises, and that's what we call the big quit. Huh? But the question is why? We didn't address this much in this discussion, but the first factor is wages. So what people say is that they think that there's an inadequacy between what they earn and their work, because this is a taboo topic in France. You don't talk about your salary, but factually, the constrained expenditures, that's the rent, energy, and the pre-engaged expenditures like subscriptions, for example, telephone or any other, they are on the rise. So people look at that and they want a more decent life, and it's in all social professional categories. So what comes out of these studies, of these surveys, is an inadequacy between work and salary. And the second thing is the professional development perspective. This is a concrete element. So is there a possibility for internal mobility inside the company? Not only theoretical. And the third thing is their relationship to management in France. It's taboo also. But if you have an inspiring management, and it's very important. And the people who leave, in the top 3 reasons they give, they say there's a toxic management in this company. The meaning, the sense, the fact that their work makes sense. So we'll let the social specialist define that. And the 5th factor is sociologist. Is flexibility is not only telework. Telework is considered today as something that is acquired. It doesn't mean that we're 100% of the time at home or 100% in the office, but this dimension of flexibility is very important, and it comes out in all the studies. I said that everybody said more or less the same with this top 5. It changes a little bit according to the country and according to the age of the candidate, but globally it's the same. And what it shows and demonstrates, it's not true that young people don't want to work, no longer want to work. Not true. But I think that the importance they give to the work, their requirements have evolved. And the 90s, work boiled down to what was the second most important thing in one's life after family. In 2021, so it's not long after, it's in the fourth position: family, friends, leisure, and then work. And so we can look at things in both two ways. Work is still relatively important, but not as much. So it's a decomplexed relation to work. So what work is, the importance of work in one's life. So to conclude, we see that many things that take place in enterprises and companies, talking about this shortage of competencies, attrition, I think that there are many things to invent, to recreate. Personally, I've placed a lot of importance on parenthood. We have a very young population at Mackenzie. The mean age is 33 years old, so we have this question of parenthood. So there are a lot of things we can do, very creative, to manage these life moments where the relationship to work changes. So thank you. Thank you, Clarisse Magnan. So you were the first to talk about wages and salaries and income. And I imagine, Laura Hartmann, that they are important concepts for workers, especially in this inflation period that we suffer from, what it involves, what it implies, and the impact it has on our buying power. So I think there are a lot of commonalities between the Swedish situation and the situation in France. So when we talk about inequalities, we talk about salaries and work to live, live to work. You know, what's the situation in Sweden?
Bonjour, et merci pour
Hello, bonjour et merci de cette invitation.
deliver in French, so I hope I can continue in English. I was very intrigued by the topic of this session and the question, and I think there are so many dimensions of it. I imagine that many of you, just like me, love our work. We are prepared to come here. I don't know if you can say whether this is work or leisure or consumption of knowledge for you.
Please hold the mic close to your mouth, please.
That is definitely the case for me. I actually postponed my holidays to come here and listen to the very interesting sessions. So we basically work and live at the same time. But there is another reality out there in Sweden, as in many European countries now. People hardly can support themselves, even though they have full-time jobs or full-time pensions. Hard to put food on the table. And this is, of course, a result of the cost of living crisis that started when the inflation and the interest rates started to rise. But it's actually a much longer development in many European countries of rising inequality and rising differences. So these people, they work, but they don't get enough to live. And why is this important? I'll use my minutes to convince you that this is actually one of the main questions and main issues we have to take seriously if the transition that we are talking about on these scenes these days is about to happen. But I'll give you some examples from Sweden, which is the country, the dream country of high equality and almost no poorness, traditionally, probably in your minds. When we ask the ordinary wage owners, workers that I represent in the Confederation, if we ask them a question, how hard it is to cope or handle an unexpected expense of 500 euros within a week, 4.2 out of 10 say it's difficult or it's impossible. We know that inequality has risen during several decades. The Gini coefficient that we often use as a measure has risen from basically 0.2 in the 80s to 0.33 when we look at the disposable income. 69 industry worker wages are needed to get the income of a Swedish CEO today, and this is a unique high figure to be Sweden. At the meantime, social tension is arising. We see falling social trust in a country that has been unique in high social trust and trust towards institutions. Last election campaign last summer, the two themes that were dominating was gang shootings, rising criminality, and high gasoline prices. So this is something that is really affecting even our country, and I know the situation is the same. The level of conflict is rising. In the meantime, we have this huge, tremendous, and necessary transition that we have to go through quicker than ever, the green transition. We have great legislation and rules from the European Union now with emission trading system. And if it's about to work through the markets and through the society so we actually can reach the goals with the climate transition, we need acceptance. We need acceptance among the people so that the high gasoline prices are not the main issue that we are conflicting on and discussing in an election campaign. And I truly believe that all European countries have a lot to learn, including Sweden today, has a lot to learn about from the traditional Swedish model that has, through decades, delivered a very stable society, high productivity, high growth, and good relations. And I'd like to just lift a couple of basic elements from the Swedish model. One is, of course, to truly encourage, as an employer, as a business, as a politician, a true social dialogue with strong unions as a counterpart. Another thing is to put all effort that you can in businesses, in politics, on training, reskilling, education, active labor market policies, all kinds of measures that are needed for workers to feel safe and secure in the transition that is needed, either within the company or to another company. We see that really happening now in Sweden when the green transition is going very quickly and industrial change. And that is done way too low, way too little in many European countries now. You need to feel safe and secure in the transition. That, of course, includes decent unemployment insurance and support in this transition, so that we can use the old slogan of Swedish unions: we are not afraid of new technology, we're afraid of old technology that keeps us in competitive firms and businesses. So we really have to cope with this rising inequality. It is a true obstacle for the transition to happen. And I think there's hope, because the Nordic countries have shown for many decades that it actually works. You can do it. Of course, we have to reinvent a new model of it. And then, when we've done that, we can start talking about how we use the higher productivity and growth, maybe to decrease the working hours for more of us. For too many people today, reduced working hours is not an option. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
So Arno Suriso, so one-man support, your consultants are freelance people, these are not employees, not your employees. So regarding the relationship to work, to labor, what does this status mean? What does it change? Thanks a lot, Olivier. Good afternoon to all of you. We are a younger company than the companies on the podium. We are a scale-up company. We are one-man support. We build on consultants and transition managers that are all independent. So the private and public organizations will be equipped with high-level organizational resources with lots of flexibility and costs under control. To answer your question, Olivier, I will raise a question. I will ask a question to the people amongst you. For those who are self-employed people, raise your hand. freelance people, raise your hand. There are quite a good number of people. And in 5 years' time, if we were to talk about the same theme, I think that there would be many more people, in fact, raising their hands. 14% of freelance people, 30% in the United States, 30% in the UK, and the number of freelance workers is gaining ground, and people are more mature. Regarding your question now, it is a very interesting question. I think that freelance workers, have given us precise answer. It's not a matter of living to work or vice versa. It means to work to live and to live to work. So work is at the service of life and vice versa. So it's not a matter of choosing between one of the two. It's a matter of using live and work together. So we talked about that with Stéphane at lunch. Of course, employees can say that they want to live and work, and this is the goal of companies. To live and work, this is what we've done over the past few years when you consider the evolution of the role of women and the evolution of the role of men. We talked about this topic. Men and women have to play different roles, professional role, family role, societal role. So my wife asked me to change the nappies of her children, or I had to give a bath to my children, but at the same time I had to be very good professionally, and at the same time I had to be involved in society. So men and women are required to live and work and to perform both roles, and that's good, that's great. And that's a piece of good news, because all the stakeholders need to focus on that, live and work. And is important. So you have people who work, they have a balanced life, they don't have to choose between developing work, passionate work, and ambitious work, and private and professional balance. They can have both. And we have Benoit, for example, a freelance worker managing the winery, the family winery, and to fund that business, he does part-time consultancy missions. We have Mathilde. She's fond of sailing in order to cross the Atlantic for 3 months in summer. She will spend 9 months with the customers as part of our missions, and she will be working hard to deliver her missions. That's a piece of good news for companies. With the freelance workers, with self-employed workers, with the employees who can reconcile work and pleasure. Alexandre said that self-employed people were more committed than employees. So it's a matter of convergence. So employees and freelance workers should be committed. So companies via freelance workers can get access to resources. And as part of their missions, freelance workers have to perform. And because their life is at stake, fathers are more present, mothers can fulfill now many roles. So at the end of the day, that's a piece of good news for our country. So I think that independence is a great tool. And of course, we've noticed that it's not enough. Thanks a lot.
On a pris un petit peu de retard, mais comme toujours, donc je vais me contenter peut-être.
We are running late, so I will ask a twofold question to the different representatives, and we have a Q&A session. As part of your organizations, as part of your functions, have you seen a specific period, a sort of disruptive period, especially during COVID, teleworking? And of course, it's not a world of teddy bears, but we've seen that people have different perceptions about work, different relationships about work, people want to make progress in their company. You have also this notion of a family balance. Of course, the rate of unemployment has dropped, and you have a better balance maybe between employees and employers. Stefan, first, something that we've experienced, the war of talent. It's a war. And it's not a war between actuaries and legal experts. There's a war in terms of customer relationships and managers, because you have to consider the proactivity that we need to get in order to handle customers. Customers should be treated as persons and not objects. So that's very important, the war of talent. And as part of this war of talent, I mean, all blows are authorized. So you have quality of work, the premises, the experience that we offer. And I went through two disruptive patterns. During COVID, the offices were empty, people were exhausted, and mental health was impaired. As an insurer, we insure many companies. We've noticed that people are out of work because of mental health. Never ever have we seen that. First disruptive pattern, and second disruptive pattern when we moved out. We moved to new premises. We revisited our policy. We worked like mad as part of the collective intelligence process, because we wanted to get promises that were similar to the premises where we want to live. I had a motto: we are competing with the domicile. People should get back to work, should get back to offices. This has to do with human relationships. Creativity can be spawned, and presenting a united front is possible when people are in the offices. And one of the employees told me, that's great, these new premises are great. I told him, yes, we're competing with your home. Yes, you're right, because today I'm working from home normally, but I wanted to have lunch with my colleagues. Laura, you wanted to say something about that. Go ahead, Laura.
Yes, thank you. Of course, all these issues about how the pandemic changed the situation at the working places is relevant, and I can see it in my own working place as an expert and a chief economist in the Confederation. But in the meantime, we again have like 9 out of 10 or more than that of all the workers in Sweden. Nothing changed except for that the going to work was more dangerous since there was a pandemic going on. So the situation, it is not an option to work at home or do the work in a different way. And I'm a bit afraid that the more we talk about this, that the pandemic changed the situation for all, we just sort of increase the sense of being outside and being not one of those who are concerned. So your employees in the, not you, but the next one, your employees at the caring sector, the industries. I mean, we have a talent crisis in Sweden as well, but it's actually not the highly educated engineers that are the most lacking. It's the vocationally trained, caring personnel and industry workers. So we shouldn't sort of forget about that.
Alors, on va prendre quelques questions très rapidement, puis par ici au premier rang. Je crois qu'il y a...
So first row, there's a question. There will be a roving mic. So go ahead. You, Mr. in the first row.
Merci pour ces interventions.
So thank you for your observations. Allow me to make 3 observations. I listened to you. Taylorism has changed the way the work is managed. I'm a doctor specializing in public health, and I had to look at work stoppage. So there's a recent phenomenon. People are exhausted, people resign, people burn out, and people are absent from work. And I don't think that COVID is responsible for that. It just started before COVID. I've noticed that within the company, the relationships with work have changed. I listened to the CNP founding partner, and I think that tasks have been individualized. So employees were asked to talk about objectives and means and to make proposals. And in fact, the working colleagues have become competitors amongst themselves. Working conditions have improved, but the work atmosphere has deteriorated for the worst. Working competencies are not recognized. The strategies for promotion are totally different, and people are suffering within the companies. There are some people who've been committed to their company, and overnight these people will be relegated to the sidelines. That's sad. Of course, the relationships amongst workers changed the quality of life. That's why many people are absent from work. Who would like to answer? I do agree with you. It's a very interesting viewpoint. And in fact, this has to do with the market being introduced within the corporate world. Some patients cannot be insured because they have some pathologies. This is something that I wanted to tell you, because there is no excess premium, but you refuse some patients because they suffer from heavy pathologies. Yes, that's a different kettle of fish. No. We accept 99.8% of the requests that are being made. What about the remaining 0.2%? Thanks a lot for your question. Another question. So, in fact, people are suffering at work, and we have a new perspective with Laura Hartman. So, in fact, we thought that work was essential and was the be-all and end-all of everything. So there are workers, there are different types of work. For people, it's a matter of recognition. For others, it's high income. And for others, it's deprivation and suffering, and the problems are not the same. And I think that we've talked about executives and not about the employees. Of course, the executives, they want to live to work, and vice versa. Those who are at the bottom, that's quite different. And for some people, working for quite a long time doesn't pose any problem. But conversely, the pension reform buffeting the most vulnerable was very cruel. Please a question. So don't you think that it would be urgent? I will pronounce a word. Sharing work sharing for all those who are the most vulnerable. So people who don't work should work more, and those who work full-time maybe should work less. Sophie Boissard, what do you think of that? So you have a lot of nurses, nursing auxiliaries. Those tasks can be very painful, physically painful. So how do you square the circle? I think that we have some social images regarding the work. Allow me to make two observations following your comments. There are some team organizations that will lead to suffering at work. And for the same jobs, for the same professions with old citizens or in health structures in some places, you have no occupational accident, and in some other companies, the rate will be 20% in terms of work accidents. So I think that, Clarisse, you've said that it depends on the quality of management. It depends on the local relationships. And when you work on this point, everybody should be recognized. Labor relations should be based on respect and consideration. And with the same team, you can change things altogether. So, of course, we shouldn't get a generic approach. In terms of work, men and women, each and every one of us, every morning we would go to work. We will work with colleagues. We'll have lots of social interactions and relations. So that's why we want to go to work. That's why with COVID, there was a feeling of solitude and loneliness. And at work, if you have some fruitful and respectful links, the organization of work will be better balanced. People will be very proud of what they do. People will feel recognized, or they will feel unhappy because, in fact, we need to start with good relations at work. you've said that those with lots of degrees should be happy or are the only ones to be happy at work. That's not the case. I mean, this is something that I've witnessed on a daily basis. It depends on consideration, respect, stability, and capacity to cast a future-oriented eye. You can be a nursing auxiliary, you can be a nurse, you can be working in a job emotionally. Of course, you need to be fit. For a nursing auxiliary, she can work until 64 years of age, and I could give you lots of examples. People will tell you, I want to retire, and I'm afraid. Well, I'm afraid because I will lose out in terms of contact with other people. So I think that we need to focus on consideration and what is very basic in the companies and what is very concrete in the companies. So, Pierre Decaisse, we have 2 seconds. By way of conclusion, I will be fast. Of course, with suffering at work, with the labor crisis, there's an in-depth crisis that is typical of a period, and it's a global crisis. But of course, we are here to talk about hope. When we talk about crisis, when there's a crisis, there's the possibility to rebound. There is some resilience, and of course, there are lots of demands for more autonomy, for more independence. This is the hope that blossoms for our future. So on this positive note, I would like to thank you all and have a nice day. Thanks a lot.